Let's learn Debounce quickly. We have a normal wait project here, which is a TypeScript wait project, not using React here. Because this keyword in React behaves a bit differently, so I want to stick to traditional JavaScript or TypeScript. I'm using TypeScript here. We have two functions, button click, arrow, and button click function. We will use this arrow and normal function when we are explaining this concept. But for now, both behave similarly. So button click arrow, when we click the button, button click arrow, which is, sorry, this should be arrow function. This should be printed. So yeah, that works. And when I replace this with button click function, that also works in normal function. Now we need to debounce this. So what is debounce? Debounce is delaying the function click, nothing else. Delaying the function by certain amount of defined time. We can define the time in milliseconds. Now before we jump into debounce, I would like to also show you how it behaves, how this keyword behaves in both arrow and this normal function. So if you print this here, we can actually leave this like this. It still works, but if you want to just get rid of the error, the first parameter will be always this keyword. It tracks from where this was clicked. So this button function was executed from within this. So this is the caller. This button is the caller of this button click function. So this keyword here becomes this button itself. So when I now do this happens, and button is indeed this. But if I do the same here, it says button click is declared but never read. For example, if I do button click arrow, you see it's undefined because arrow functions don't have undefined. It's not because of I'm not defining it here. I cannot even define it because an arrow function cannot have this parameter. So it right away throws error to my face. So I shouldn't be declaring this here. So in this, this doesn't make sense. So we can say arrow functions don't have this keyword. Okay. So we understood this. Now let's move to debounce. I have a file here. I'll keep it here, and we will now change this to normal function. Just test it again. Okay, that works. What I really want is when I click this, it immediately prints, right? It immediately prints, but I don't want it to immediately print it. I want it to take some time and then print it. How do I do that? So instead of calling button click function, I want to click some other function. So I'll say delayed button click, and what should this be? So this should be some other function. So here I had button click arrow or button click function, which was a normal function, but now I need to have some other function here, right? Some other function, if I have, that will be called here. So let's implement that some other function. Let's export a default function called debounce. By the way, debounce is basically the delayed behavior of a function. So this can be a debounced click. Okay. So this debounce function should be able to take any function in general. So this can be any function. And what should happen is, let's, for example, click console log for now. So maybe button clicked inside debounce. Okay. So if I'm able to do this, let me just comment this out for a second. If I can do debounce like this, I'm importing debounce from this. And when I click it here, so button clicked inside debounce. Okay, so no surprises there. But I don't want to directly console log it here. I want it to be a function of my choice. I can pass arrow function, I can pass button click function, I can pass button click arrow, whatever I want. So how do I do that? I can do, like, let's say I assign, instead of this, I'll just assign debounce. Now debounce will be able to take a function and I'll pass button click arrow, for example. But you see, the problem is the moment I do this, this prints. Why? Because this is no longer a function, right? This is no longer a function. I mean, this is directly a function call because I'm calling debounce here directly. And this basically should have been another function, just like how we did with this function. Okay. So what we can do, let's do debounce click and we will do this call here. Okay. And then we call debounce click. Now if we click, see, it comes from here. So we have the setup ready now. We have debounce click. Even though we are calling it here, this thing is wrapped inside a function and that is defined here. So this is called only when we click the button, and when we click that button, this function, which is indeed this function, gets executed. That means this part gets executed and this will be called and we get the console log. Okay, we are still not using the function here, so let's put that to use. And this is a function, so I just need to execute it directly when this function is called. So see, this works. Arrow, because I'm using an arrow. What if I use a normal function? Okay, so normal function, it's still not working. Okay, it works. Let's forget about undefined here for a second. We will handle that very soon. We are interested when we use this normal function, we expect this undefined to be the this keyword of this button like we showed, but we will handle that a little later. Okay, now why did we do this setup? Why did we have a wrapper function? Basically, we need to delay the debounce behavior. So, I mean, we need to delay the button click behavior. That's why we had another function. So instead of calling it like this should actually return us another function. Okay, this should return us another function. And then inside that, what happens if we call like this? The reason we are doing it because we need to delay it. So the first thing that comes to mind, actually, like before even doing this, let's say we did this and it worked, right? It worked. But what if we have to simply delay this function call? Can we do set timeout? Set timeout is the primary thing which we need to get into our mind when we start coding debounce. So set timeout. This function gets executed, okay, after a delay of maybe 1000 seconds, 1000 milliseconds. I'll comment this. Let's see if that works. On clicking that, see, it worked. Okay, so when I first click it, I give 1000 seconds, it printed. But did you notice something? Subsequent calls, see, subsequent calls are very quick. Only the delay was for the first call. So that is what makes this question challenging. It's not just about wrapping this in set timeout. Okay, it doesn't just work like that. What we need now is we have a concept of the set timeout giving us back a timer here, timer ID. Every set timeout gives us back a timer ID. Now, why is this important? This is important because, see, this is the core idea of debounce. What happened, did you notice one thing? When I clicked the first time, the delay happened because the set timeout was delayed for 1000 seconds, which was good. But the next call, the next click, and after the click after that, when I did that, there was definitely a delay, but the previously completed set timeouts. So for every click, the set timeouts get registered. And as and when I'm clicking, when I stop, all the set timeouts which occurred before got completed and started executing. So that is where I don't see a delay. For example, let's say I clicked at this timestamp. There was a delay. So imagine this is a click. I clicked here. The debounce, the set timeout ran, and it gave me 2 seconds, and then this got printed. I clicked again. I clicked again here. So for this, there was a delay. When I was clicking this, also there was a delay. When I clicked this got executed because this set timeout of first one got completed. When I was clicking this might have got completed. So for any further calls, for example, when I was calling this one to be particular, it would have run this. So when I'm calling this, it would have run this. So like that. So the previous ones would have run for the next subsequent calls. So if you notice, I'll click 10 times, and once I click, I'll move my cursor on debounce and I'm not clicking anymore. But still, it will finish all the 10 calls after me leaving the cursor, after me leaving the click. Okay, let's examine that. I'll save this file. Let's do this exercise. So I'm starting now. I'll do 10 clicks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now see. Okay. Now if you notice, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, somewhere I missed and I clicked it again. So there are 11 clicks. I did 11 clicks. If you want to just be very thorough on that, let's just remove this for a second and try again. I'll do 5 clicks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I did an extra click. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, maybe 6. See, 6 completed. So I left clicking at third or fourth call, but it completed all 6 after the delay. So my point is, when I click this got completed. So like that. I hope you understood the point. Now, what is the solution for this? When I click this, there was no previously running time, so it waited for 1 second. When I click this, there was no waiting. I mean, the set timeout was not there yet. So, but this was the only timer which would run for this one. And similarly, for this one, we have these two. So as and when I'm clicking, the previous ones get executed. So we don't want that. When I stop clicking, then only this call should get registered. Let's say I'm clicking. I click this and then here I stop. So this is the stop. And when I stop it, it should get executed. So what is a clear way for this? I can do this with clear timeout. And I am clearing my timer ID. But I defined it here, so I shouldn't be defining here. Okay. Let's say I define let timer ID here. And I'll assign this to a number and I'll not assign any value to that. Now, if I keep clicking and if I leave, see, this worked only for the last call. So what is happening here? Let's understand. I clicked. So whenever I click, the first time I click, okay, The first time I click, you see, the very first time I clicked only once, and after 2 seconds it registered. So why does that happen? I click and this gets executed, right? So these two lines get executed. The clear timer first gets executed, and there is no timer ID at that point. So this is basically null at that point. Okay, so I'll just assign this to a null number or a null. Now that complaint, so this should properly type one should be of actually return type of, so type of set timeout. Let's not go over this type now, I'll explain it later. Basically the point is the timer ID is undefined. Okay, the timer ID is undefined. So first time I click, the clear interval doesn't clear anything, and the set timeout gets executed after 1 second. Fair enough. But when I click the next time, we have the previous timer ID registered because that's where we ended and we stored it to the timer ID. Okay. And when I click the next time, it clears that previous timer. So this timeout also won't execute. And we again come to this line basically. So again, let me explain clearly. So when we click debounce, the first time there is no timer ID. And it doesn't clear anything, which is fine. And we set a new timer ID now, and we registered that to set timeout. And now I immediately click on, so this timer ID is now the new timer. So let's say this will be new timer or second click. Maybe I can say first click. So the first click one got registered here. I now do a second click. The first click will be wiped out and the second click will be registered. Second click will be registered and it will be waiting for this timer to expire for the second click. And if I immediately click third time, the third click will be registered here. The third click will be registered because the second click here, it was second, and the moment I click third time, this clear timeout wipes out the second one. Okay, so that's what is happening, and it happens until I stop. So the moment I stop, what happens is, for this click, let's say I click for the last time. When I click for maybe 7th time, this was 7th. When I click for 8th time, it clears the 7th, and this line gets executed, and we have a new timer of 8th where I don't do a 9th click, I just stop, and then this timer elapses naturally and we get the set timer, this function gets executed at this point after we stop. So that is the beauty of debounce. So this is the core concept. These 4 lines are the core concept of debounce. So if you can explain this to the interviewer, obviously my explanation was a bit lengthy, but you can just keep it concise and explain the point. But this is the overall debounce. Now you got 50% of debounce. We still have rest 50%. What is that? Now you see, we are actually doing this and the timer ID is defined somewhere in the global scope, but we should always limit the scope to a function. So instead of this setup, what we can do is, let's comment this out. We need to have a function. Okay, let's move this timer inside this and we will return another function here. Now I'll show you what happens if it's an arrow function, but bear with me here. I'll return a normal function and these 2 lines, I'll add it inside this function. Okay. So did that change anything? No. How the code was before? The code was like this before. Let me rewrite and show you. It was like this. So this was uncommented. So I'm simply, what I'm doing is I'm just wrapping this inside. I'll return a new function and I'll wrap that inside here so that I can move this to this scope. Okay. Now, when we call, we need to change this setup a little bit now. So when we actually do debounce of button click, so now this arrow is not necessary. We do debounce of button click function. That is, we are actually calling this function, and that gives back this function. So basically this function is what is returned to this one, and it's a function, so it's fine. So let's test this. If it works, I'll just do a click, and if it works, we are good. So it works. Does debounce functionality work? Let's check. I'm clicking. I'll just move my cursor now and it should print. Yes. So honestly, you have 60% of what you need. So the rest 40% is all about this keyword and the args. Okay. So what is about this keyword? Let's take a step back, for example, for a second and do this again, just as a refresher. This function we have, and we have this keyword here, okay? And we can say just this as any, okay? This is not necessary in JavaScript. This is just a TypeScript thing where it expects this to be present in the parameter list. It will still work. I'll show you. If I click, it will still work, but this is the proper way of doing this to avoid any linting errors and stuff. Now, if I click, like I said, this button click function will actually be the this keyword inside this, because this is the one who is calling, right? If we have an object calling, for example, let's say const object is equal to name Sandeep and button click, okay, button click function. If we have this is basically like doing this, okay. This is the shorthand of writing. So if I do object dot button click function, okay, if I do this, now the moment I call, let's just clear the console. The moment I call, see, I'm not clicking any button, but still it got printed. But this object is now what it is called on, right? Object obj is this keyword for button click. So here it was different because whoever calls the button, however this button click function is executed, this depends on that. Again, what do I mean by that? However it is called, what does that mean? When I call button click function here, how am I actually invoking that? I'm invoking that by clicking this. So this click would actually call this, so that this becomes this button click. And here I'm calling this button click on the object, so this object becomes this keyword here, okay. You can just read more about this in any blog or other video, or like wait for my future videos on this, but this is how it works. So this was the refresher. Let's just delete this for now. Now what do we need? If you take a look at this now, if you go to this, if you click on this, you have this button. Why? Because like I said, this button click is this keyword. But if you do the same thing on the debounced click, the debounce should give you the same experience as the normal button click, but just it should have a delay. That's it. It shouldn't change any other parameter. For example, it shouldn't change this. So if you click now, right, see, it is the window. So we are getting a wrong this. So it is taking from this keyword is taking from the global scope. Okay, we don't want that. Okay, so how do we now define this keyword? See, we actually have set timeout function here. We are giving inside set timeout function. So how this behaves is, wherever the function was invoked in, right? So we called the, if you had like this button click function, the this keyword becomes like the button, because we are passing this directly here in the background, that this is passed as this one. But for the debounce click, what happens, you are passing it as a function, and that function is in a different context, in a different environment. It's basically the set timeout. It's in the set timeout, right? So if I console log inside the set timeout, if I console log, for example, let's say I am doing something like, instead of fn here, let's do something like fn. Does this work? It should. Okay. And now, why did I do this? Because I wanted to show you a concept of this. I can actually, this can be written, see, to avoid confusion, I'll explain it here. Fn here can be written as fn as an arrow function, and immediately executing this. And this can further be broken down like this. I can write it like this. Okay. So that gives the same experience. Now I can console log this, okay, what this is. So if I do this here, so this keyword, so this in set timeout, okay, when I click here, this in set timeout is the button indeed, right? Why? If I make this arrow function, okay, if I make this arrow function, what happens? If I make this arrow function, see, we get window. So the set timeout, inside an arrow function, we get a window, okay? But if we have an arrow function like this, arrow function doesn't have its own this. It takes from its parent, okay? So in the parent, in this function, if I console log parent this, so what is parent this? When I console log, so parent this is the button. So I'm calling debounce click. So in this debounce click, this keyword refers to the button, which is basically the parent this, which is exactly what it's logging. Again, if I change this to arrow function, this parent this would change, because like I said, arrow functions wouldn't have this keyword, so it will be undefined, right? So that is the reason I told this should be normal function. So now when I do this, okay, this is preserved. Now what I want to do is, I want to keep this as an arrow function, because this will be taken from the inside this arrow function, that this keyword should be taken from this parent, okay? So this here refers to the parent, which is the debounce click, which is a proper one. So what I need to do now is, I can just do apply and this. So where is this coming from? This is coming from the parent. So like I said, in the TypeScript, I can just add this, or even without adding this, this should work. Now if I do this, see, it prints properly. So this is the same behavior which we got when we did button click function, if you see, but here we don't have a delay. But if we do debounce click, we have a delay, okay? See, like this. So just to avoid this error, we can have this here, and that clears up all the errors. So this is what interviewer expects, but this is just 80%. We still have 20% missing. What is that? That is about args. Okay, what args am I talking about? Again, before we talk about args, let's check how it behaves with button click arrow. So button click arrow, if I do this, what do you think this should be? Let's check. See, this is undefined. Are we missing something? Let us check. So the way to check is, you just replace this button click with arrow. You don't want delay here, just to check if this works or not. If you do, see, it works fine. Why is that? Why we don't have this? Like I explained, arrow functions don't get its own this. So we have the same behavior here. So for the arrow functions, we don't have to care about this. So it works fine. So for the arrow function, we get undefined, and for the normal function, we get a delayed button, which is good. Okay. Now let's see if we take any arguments here. For example, I have a message maybe, okay, and that message will be string. So this function might take message and I want it here, my message next to this. Okay. Now if I just do button click, I don't get any message. I get undefined. Why? Because I am not passing the args anywhere. So, but this function can actually take this and args as the next parameter. So I can do args. This is how I need to destructure args. Basically, it will be an array of any. Args can be anything, right? So any is fine here, and I can just do args here. Okay. Now it will still be undefined. This is fine. This will actually pass your test. This is what interviewer expecting. But if we do this one here, this actually works. So where are we getting this point event from? Point event is basically the add event listener will add an event as the second parameter. So that is taking as the message here, but that's not what we want. So what do we need actually? Instead of this debounce click passing it here like this, I know this is a function, but we can actually do something like function. Okay, let me show you this inside clicked function. So this is the clicked function, right? Clicked function. So how this function looks, so I'll just click, see that this works here fine. And if we do an arrow function again, we should get undefined because arrow doesn't have its own this. Okay, so far so good. Now what I need debounced click to execute here, and I want to pass my message hello there. Okay, and when I do this, see, I get it, hello there. But this is undefined because I'm not passing. If I call like this, I'm not passing. So let me remove this. I'm not passing this keyword. So this becomes the parameter here. This becomes the args, but where is my this? If I call like this, I am losing the this. I'm not passing it anymore, right? Because I'm not inside the button. So this debounce click is no more inside this button click. It's inside this function, and inside this function, even though we have this keyword assigned to the button click, we are not passing it here. So how do you pass the this keyword of this to this? Because the this keyword here is undefined, right? So the way you do that is using call. You can call as this, okay, which is the outer this. Let us see if that works. Yes, that works. So what you can do, you can actually take this as function debounced click with args, and then do debounce click with args. That would work fine. Okay, you can pass whatever arguments you want, and this keyword comes from here. Like I said, it's not mandatory, but to make TypeScript happy, you'll add that. So all you need is basically this one. All you need is basically this one. So if you just can get this code working, your interviewer will be happy. But in order to understand these like 10 lines of code, you had to go through all these things. So practice this uh, by explaining these concepts to yourself, and you should be good at Debounce.